In November 1999, Fortune magazine crowns a man. Not CEO of the Year, not industry leader. They name him Manager of the entire 20th century. A distinction the magazine had never given anyone before. That man is Jack Welch, and he runs the most valuable company on the planet, nearly $500 billion. A company that makes everything: aircraft engines, light bulbs, turbines, plastics, television programs, home appliances, and the most profitable business of all, loans.
25 years later, that empire no longer exists. They chopped it into 3 pieces. And the most disturbing part is that the decisions that turned it into the biggest company on the planet are exactly the ones that killed it from the inside.
I'm talking about General Electric, the company American capitalism considered the model to copy for an entire century.
As always, at the end, we'll go over the takeaways from this story. And this episode is especially interesting to you if you believe that having more business lines always protects your company. Because sometimes what? It looks like strength is the crack that's going to break you.
To understand why it ends up split into 3 pieces, you have to understand why it started with 2 companies forced to merge. Year 1892. The United States has been trying to electrify itself for a decade and can't. And it can't for a ridiculous reason. Because 2 companies are suing each other over patents, the legal permits that give an inventor a monopoly over what they've created. One is Edison General Electric Company, founded by Thomas Edison, the man who had invented the incandescent light bulb. The other is Thomson-Houston Electric Company. Each has its own patents on how to generate and distribute electricity. And they're systems that don't fit together. So whoever installs an Edison grid can't then plug anything from Thomson-Houston into it, and vice versa. No city hall knows which system to install, and the lawsuits are paralyzing the electrification of half the country. Until the most powerful man on Wall Street shows up, J.P. Morgan, the banker who in that era practically decided which companies lived and which ones died. Morgan doesn't negotiate. He forces. He pushes the 2 companies to merge and founds General Electric on April 15, 1892. And here, something happens that says a lot about this company's DNA. Edison, the founder, is left out of the new board and resigns. The first president is not an inventor. It's a former shoe manufacturer named Charles Coffin, the first in a long list of executives who will run GE over the next century.
Look at this. The day it's born, GE already has a very clear message written into its DNA. Financial decisions will always weigh more than technical ones. And that, 100 years, will be the bullet that kills it.
And over the next 80 years, GE grows like a 1,000-headed monster, manufacturing anything that plugs into the grid. Light bulbs, radios, washing machines, warplane engines, nuclear power stations. By 1980, it's already a huge company. But it's not the most valuable in the world, not by a long shot. The stock is flat. Analysts consider it a boring dinosaur. Until 1981, when the change arrives. The previous CEO, Reginald Jones, retires, and the board picks the youngest successor in GE's history, a 45-year-old chemist named Jack Welch. Welch shows up with a doctrine that sounds like a sentence. Be number 1 or number 2 in your market. The rest, fix it, sell it, or close it. And they pin the nickname Neutron Jack on him, like the neutron bomb, which kills people and leaves the buildings intact. More than 100,000 layoffs in his first years, without a single factory closing. Wall Street adores him. The stock starts climbing. And in 1986, Welch makes his boldest move. He buys RCA for $6.28 billion, the largest non-oil merger in history up to that point. RCA brings a trophy Welch had wanted for years, the NBC network, one of the 3 big national television channels. And now, GE, which had spent a century making light bulbs, was also producing Saturday Night Live.
But that was the storefront. The real play was somewhere else, in a division Welch quietly grew for 20 years.
That division was called GE Capital, and it didn't manufacture anything. In practice, it was a bank hidden inside an industrial company. It lent money to customers so they could buy GE turbines. It did leasing, a system where you rent equipment long-term and pay as you go, for aircraft, cars, and medical equipment. And little by little, it moved into mortgages, consumer loans, investment funds, and derivatives, complex financial contracts that are bought and sold like products. And it did all this leaning on the AAA credit rating of the industrial parent, the highest credit rating that exists, which let it borrow at incredibly cheap rates. When Welch arrived in 1981, GE Capital was a marginal business. By the time he retired in 2001, it generated more than 40% of the group's revenue.
And here's the question almost no one dared to ask out loud in the Welch era. What were you really? A manufacturer or a lender? Because when the storm comes, that answer decides whether you drown or whether you float.
From the outside, everything was going well. In 2000, Welch launches the most public succession process in American corporate history. 3 finalists battle openly for months to inherit the throne. And in September 2001, after 20 years in the job, Welch hands over the keys. His company had reached over $500 billion at its peak in 1999, the most valuable on the planet. And although the stock had slipped a bit since then, GE was still the undisputed king of Wall Street. The chosen successor is called Jeff Immelt, a gray-haired engineer who had spent 22 years inside the house. Welch picks him out of loyalty. Analysts applaud, the shares hold, and everyone predicts another golden decade. Immelt officially takes the chair on September 7, 2001. 4 days. 4 days later, 2 planes crash into the World Trade Center, and it turns out those engines were built by GE. And the insurance policies of the victims and the airlines were covered by subsidiaries of GE Capital, companies controlled by the parent but operating separately. And it turns out that in September 2001, nobody yet knew this attack would be only the first push of a decade that would strip naked the financial monster Welch had hidden inside a light bulb company.
Because the truth they would take 7 years to see is that the manager of the century's crown was hollow on the inside.
And the truth arrives in slow motion. Immelt defends Welch's course and swears that GE Capital is the jewel in the crown. But inside, the problem is growing. The aircraft engine industry depends on airlines buying, and after 9/11, the airlines aren't buying anything. Engine sales plummet. But GE Capital, the hidden bank we've already talked about, keeps producing profits, because the global financial system is flooded with cheap money, and the banks lend to anyone. Immelt sells the plastics division and tries to turn GE into a pure industrial company. But behind the scenes, GE Capital already generates almost half of the group's revenue, with a balance sheet full of mortgages and very short-term debt that has to be rolled over every few days.
Look at what's going on here. The traditional business is suffering, but the hidden bank keeps lying to the CEO about the company's real health.
September 15th, 2008. Lehman Brothers, another financial giant, collapses. Overnight, the world discovers that several companies that looked industrial were actually banks in disguise. And among them all, there's one with an especially dirty balance sheet: GE. That same day, Immelt calls Henry Paulson, the Treasury Secretary, the United States' top economic official, and tells him GE can't find anyone to lend it money for even 24 hours. The most valuable company on the planet has just run out of oxygen. The air that inflated GE Capital for 20 years evaporates in hours.
And here's the truth about money. When things go well, everyone lends it to you at a ridiculous rate. When things go bad, not even your mother will lend it to you.
And then the lifeboat appears. The most respected investor in the United States, Warren Buffett, injects $3 billion into GE by buying preferred shares, a type of stock that pays the investor a fixed 10% every year. The market reads it as a vote of confidence. But those $3 billion don't even cover a tenth of what GE needs. The federal government steps in behind. The Federal Reserve, the country's central bank, starts lending money directly to GE so it can operate day to day. And the state guarantees its debt so the banks trust it again. And for the first time in its history, GE cuts the quarterly check it pays to shareholders from 31 to 10 cents, a 2/3 drop that was experienced as a betrayal. Immelt keeps promising to dismantle GE Capital. In 2013, he sells NBC to Comcast for $16.7 billion. The trophy Welch had bought 30 years earlier returned to the market for almost triple what it cost. But in 2017, with the stock at half the price of the day he started, Immelt resigns. His successor, John Flannery, lasts just 14 months. And in June 2018, GE is kicked out of the Dow Jones, the index that gathers the 30 most representative companies of the American stock market, after 110 years inside. It was the last member of the original index still standing. The company that for a century embodied American capitalism is left without a seat on the podium. In October 2018, the board does the unthinkable. It hires Larry Culp, the first CEO in 126 years to come from outside GE. Culp comes from Danaher, where he had multiplied the company's value by 5, and he takes the decision no internal executive had been able to make. In November 2021, he announces that GE is going to split into 3 independent companies: GE Healthcare for healthcare, GE Vernova for energy, and GE Aerospace for aircraft engines. In January 2023, healthcare splits off. In April 2024, Vernova and Aerospace start trading on their own. And so, 131 years after that forced merger by J.P. Morgan, the conglomerate that dominated the 20th century ceases to exist as such.
And here we pull out the lessons you can apply to your business today. First takeaway: selling the bad stuff when everyone already knows it's bad gets you half the price.
When GE tried to offload GE Capital years after the bailout, no one wanted banks anymore. The sales went at fire sale prices, and it's estimated that if they had sold before the crash, they would have gotten triple. That product line you suspect is going downhill? That client who keeps demanding more for less? That franchise you doubt? Cut it now, not when the problem is obvious to everyone. The fair price is paid at maximum uncertainty, not at maximum certainty.
Second takeaway: credit evaporates exactly the day you need it most.
GE Capital had the AAA credit rating, the highest grade that exists, right before the crisis. A few months later, it couldn't place debt for a single day. If your business works because you get paid in 60 days and pay in 30 using a credit line, the day the bank changes its mind, you die in 2 weeks. Keep 3 to 6 months of fixed expenses in cash before even thinking about growing.
Third takeaway: the question, what business are we not in, weighs more than what are we?
For a century, GE tried to be everything at once: engines, finance, appliances, plastics, television, healthcare. It looked like strength. It was weakness. It wasn't the best at any of them. Culp ended up selling everything except 3 businesses, and then split those 3 too. If you sell 4 different things to 4 different audiences, you're not versatile, you're diffuse. Decide what you do not do, what client you do not want, what line you shut down. The hard part is never adding, it's subtracting.
Fourth takeaway: the management guru everyone idolizes is usually a lousy source of learning.
Welch was named Manager of the Century in the late 90s, and 2 decades later, his company was being dismantled. The ones that best copied his techniques, Boeing, Home Depot, ended up the same. Don't copy practices just because Apple or Tesla does them. Your context is completely different. What works at the scale of hundreds of billions does not translate to a 5-person company.
And we go with the last takeaway, which is the most important one. The sexy business always cannibalizes the boring one that pays the bills.
GE made engines and turbines. Low margin per unit, but very steady. Boring. But GE Capital generated 40% of profits. Talent went to the bank. The board meetings revolved around the bank. When the storm came, the boring business was neglected, and the sexy one blew up in the air. If you have a recurring client who pays little but pays for sure, and an exciting one-off project that pays double, the second one steals your attention. When it ends, you come back to the recurring client, and they don't remember you anymore.
GE didn't die from lack of talent. It died from too much talent placed in the wrong business. So the question before going to sleep tonight is this: where are you putting 80% of your energy today? Because if the answer is, in what I find most fun, you might be writing, without knowing it, the first chapter of your own breakup.